Right.
Hello.
Morning.
Morning. How are you?
Okay.
Looks like got a bunch of people here. Let's see. So, welcome to the meeting. Hope everyone's had a good week. I've seen some robust reports and discussions in the Slack, so that's good. Um, so, congratulations to our Google Summer Code students. We have 3 that were accepted this time. We had, Brian McCorkle, Himanshu Chougule, and Hussein Ather. So they'll be working on the project. Yeah, they'll be working on the open source ethics project. And so we've talked about what that is before. And so if you want to, we're going to be having a separate meeting for that on Fridays. But we'll be occasionally talking about it in this group as well. We'll be doing like presentations and reports, but most of the activity will be over there. So yeah, if you're interested, we have our Slack channel for. I don't think all of you are in the specific Slack channel we're using for the project, but ethics, tech, and society is also we'll be putting things in there as well. So. Yeah, so why don't we start with updates? Jesse has something he wants to report here first.
Oh yeah. I'll get into that. I'll do like a whole. I finally put together I have a world premiere unveiling of a diagram that's been in the works for a while. Just for the lab. This is all like lab admin stuff. But after general intros, I'll do a thing that's like a summer outlook, kind of what we're looking at the next few months, because there's a lot of things going on. There's a big it's coinciding really well with the just semester shift in a tip in I don't know for some schools like on the East Coast and how they do it, because I know they do it differently in the ways, but spring into summer. So I'll do a presentation on that in a little bit. As far as other updates go, I, like many others here, I got into Neuromatch Academy, which I'm looking forward to. I had a big set of plans last summer about making my own like not Google Summer of Code, but it's like Summer of Data, and it involved like some coursework. It involves the deep learning course in Neuromatch, which I was accepted to last year, but didn't get to do. And I have these big summer plans, and they all rapidly change because I got a new job. I got a research grant to study abroad in the UK, in England for a little bit, with Avery, who is in the lab but not here today. And also that's how we met Jenny of Plot Twisters, who I'll mention later today also. And as a whole, like I'm in Boston now. Sometimes you make these very specific plans, and sometimes they change for the better. But Neuromatch, I'm also very happy to be a Google Summer of Code mentor for many of the folks you'll see later today. I delivered on the, what my presentation later today is not a final version of what's happening in the lab. It's mostly just here are some things we definitely know that are happening over the next few months, and here are some things that may be happening, and it's kind of more of a way to just give you some perspective, and also create some. It's a primer to like what will we like to either target more in the summer, or I'll be putting out a call for interns shortly. So like if you would like some help, or if you're a more senior person and want to find someone who could maybe be a supportive like summer intern for your project or things like that, let me know, because those are things that we can do. we have some things that are really established, like summer of code's going to be a big chunk of stuff going forward, and the We Robot stuff is going to be a big chunk of things going forward. But just because those things are happening and NeuroMatch is happening, like there's still room to do other stuff. So that'll be more explicitly said later. But it was a very busy week. For me personally, I actually thought I had to drastically change my plans earlier this week and do some work, travel, other stuff that was just very ridiculous and so on. So Friday finally was a slower paced day for me. And by slower, I mean relatively slower, because that was like, boom, you're doing your mentor, boom, you're doing the mentorship stuff with all these people. And I was like, okay, great, for the summer of COVID. It's like, so it was slow, but it's like, for me personally, there's definitely this major shift of like, okay, well, everything that happened before is great, but now it's summer and it's happening right now. So get ready and strap in, because we're going, and then have some sense of what it's going to look like, as the next season changes over, which is like the more to say about that in the research planning, administration, professional development section. Because it's like, you got to have that multiple season viewpoint of where things are going to kind of keep the train going down the tracks, or however you want to trolley it around. But I digress. So that's been my week. I'm happy to be here. Congratulations, everybody, and I think it'll be an amazing summer. So that's my update for now.
Also, we had a new member we have like an assistant lab manager position that Jessica's been trying to recruit for, and Jermaine Mosher applied, and I accepted her, so now she's going to be doing that. She wasn't able to make it this week, but she'll be around the lab. You'll meet her. I think she put her information in the general channel in Slack, so we'll be following up on that as well in coming weeks. So, and then I'm interested to see Jesse's summer plans, because I know he sent me some things last night. I was looking at them, but we haven't discussed them yet. So we go around to the interns and ask what they've been up to. So who wants to go first?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. I can go first.
Right.
I don't really have any updates. I've been traveling and seeing family pretty much all month. So I just got back a few days ago, and I'm leaving again in a few days. But I'm happy to be here.
Okay, good. Who wants to go next?
I would add onto that. Emma has been a great part of the Cognition Futures reading group, and also kind of mentioned potentially being interested in some other things. Like, we might have a philosophy focus group, or maybe she was interested in maybe helping out with some things like that down the road. I know you're going to be busy and traveling the next couple weeks. Also, she mentioned interest in some social media stuff, but I'll say more about that later too.
Yeah.
So,
that would be good to follow up on. You did mention the philosophy group. I don't know. Well, it's something we'll have to talk about, but it sounds interesting though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not like a big group. It's more like because we have a solid interest in it, and because Amanda's a philosophy she's has a lot of philosophy experience, let's say.
Yeah.
Between that and also even things that came up in the Google Summer Code meeting, I feel like there's enough things there that we could maybe. I want making sure it has its space to discuss some things or bring some other people in if they want to have a specific focus on that might be good. But more about that later on.
Yeah, that's good. Who wants to go next?
I'll go.
Okay.
So I've just been diving into information theory more, when I have time. It's been a busy few weeks, but and I made a brief PowerPoint thing about the documentary, which unfortunately isn't like available anymore on YouTube. But I'll get into that, I guess,
Yeah.
when I have to, like when I do the presentation. But it's not very long. It's just like super quick.
Okay, yeah, that sounds good. Would you be able to do that today or next week or?
Oh, I can do it today.
Okay, we'll do it after the updates, or in that line of things. Okay, thank you. Samantha?
Okay. So no major updates this week. I've started diving back into the research a lot more, and I've also been messing around with robotics a bit because I do that as like my summer job. So been messing around with that a little bit to prepare for my summer job in a few weeks. But that's my big update. Putting my thoughts into words for research.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Is this something through UAlbany or someplace else?
It's through one of my parishes at home. We do this thing that like helps the next generation of robotics and STEM students. So we teach them like basic robot code, basic like building like basic robots and like things like that.
Yeah, that's great. I know that there's like a bunch of makerspace and like robotics up at UAlbany. That's why I asked, but that's really cool. Feel free to like share any updates about that or what you're doing because there's some overall. We won't be doing hard robotics here, but there's definitely like there's we'll be curious how that goes. I think it's a great thing to do. So.
Yeah, we've talked a bit about robotics as something separate from what we're doing. Like, we've done a lot of stuff with Bratenberg vehicles, and we've done some things with talking about robotics. But it's kind of like we also talked about VR, of course. But it's there are all these different technologies that intersect. So, yeah, that's great though. Yeah.
Yeah, it's particularly interesting in terms of like methodologies to test some of the stuff that we're looking at because it's hard to test them in some other ways. So, okay.
And Brian?
I guess Brian's the last intern.
Sure. Yeah, my big update, I guess, is that the GSoC thing is actually happening, which is so exciting. And by actually happening, I mean actually, being part of the Summer of Code instead of us just doing it anyway.
Right.
But yeah, so it's just been a lot of that, a lot of trying to get to like some actual work done, I guess, instead of just research. So trying to make the research actualized is kind of where I'm at right now.
Yeah, that's great. Okay. Yeah, that's great. Did you have anything to say, Jesse, about that, or?
Oh no, just saying congratulations again to the Google Summer of Code folks, and also congratulations to really our first like official batch of interns who come through the spring. Like this is very much sort of our first go at that. I think it worked really well. I'm really happy to have like a lot of the discussions we've had were very good. And it sounds like a lot of people wanted to stay on and do things for the summer. You're welcome to do that for sure. But it's been a really nice. That's been a really great thing. And on a personal note, yeah, like there's always that wondering, like, are you going to get whatever it is? And things like Google Summer of Code are huge for those that don't know that much about it, because like you can get a lot of support and some potentially funding, and like it's one of those things that's really weird because it can dramatically change your summer. Because if it's like you have this big thing that happens, it's just like last year for me, like I got this certain opportunities come up and it's like, well, either you're going to be doing this for a few months or you're going to be going here or you're not. And it's like it's tough to work around, but that's sort of how it goes. So that thing's going well here, and I'm glad to see a lot of the new new faces and new folks here that are doing that. Yeah. Any other updates? I know Munch is here.
Yeah.
And Morgan.
Yeah. Hey everyone, am I audible?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Himanshu here. Like I'll reintroduce myself. I'm Himanshu, second year studying information technology from VJTI Mumbai, and I'm one of the contributors to the Collective Cognition project, and really excited to be here. And like as for the updates, like currently I'm refreshing my RL concepts, and I'm also preparing a PPT to present regarding my proposal, and just looking at some research papers and further readings for like the project and open source data aspect of the project. And yeah, like as Jesse said right now, like I could relate about the GSoC thing and doing a few things at the same time.
Yeah.
Himanshu, did you say you were working on a PowerPoint, or that you wanted to present a PowerPoint today? I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, I'm working on a PowerPoint.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Because for people who wanted to present today, I know there's Amaris mentioned something. Did you want to present? Was there other presentation that you wanted? Were you going to do something, Brian, or not? I just want to make sure I have a schedule in my mind.
Oh yeah, so I did something last week. I'm happy to present again to this week, but yeah, I've had a lot of
If not, it's fine.
I think I just gotta let it stew. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's totally fine. I didn't want to I wanted the people who mentioned they wanted to present something to have space to do it, because we can talk all day long and we don't have time to do that. So yeah. All right, great. Any updates from you, Morgan?
Sure. Yeah, so Monday caught the systems biology. Is it through evolution or evolutionary theory? Anyway, a great set of speakers, and it was a number of different topics, but that Brains Through Time book, I think we talked about last fall. This is the same group that is doing, I think they're called like the Braining Club.
Yeah.
Something like, they've already done like 4 chapters of that book. It would have been good to finish that book first.
Right.
But, these were a bunch of people that were really down in the weeds in the kind of evolutionary theory, particular examples, So I've been kind of trying to refresh, at least with the audio book, trying to catch up, but I really need to do some review. Got to talk with Brian about some of these, fleshing out some of these papers, or at least directions for papers on collective cognition, which is, it's a really interesting topic, and so happy that the projects have been approved. I've posted some links. I also feel like I'm catching up over for like 5 months. So sorry if I've posted some things that you've already seen, but like the IPAM meeting on mathematics of collective intelligence, it's like Jessica Flack's just the start of the speakers, and Brian, I think, posted the I guess it was a Santa Fe Institute meeting as well.
Just their ideas about what collective cognition is, so it was kind of great.
Yeah, So sometimes they're calling it collective intelligence, or like some people have different terms, and honestly, in terms of the kind of lit review, collective behavior is also a good search term, which somewhat relates to Jesse's question about do we have examples from collective behavior in animals, like flocking and things like that cognition for the non-point animals, or are there different tiers of that kind of collective behavior, and cognitive repercussions or something like that. Anyway, so there's some great articles, and I wasn't quite sure if there's a unified bibliography on this. If there's like a doc or a service that we should use, and I mean, I'm not dropping everything into Slack, but anyway, so that was a great discussion. I know that there's I also went back and looked at some of the first articles that were posted in the GSoC threads or room, and so I saw some of the open source ideas, whereas we were kind of jumping into the Wikipedia data, or this like Twitter data, some of those things like a hyperbolic geometry make sense when you've got those like super large data sets, and so when Jessica's talking about kind of like the network extraction or network analysis versus some of the other metrics, this is definitely on the network analysis side, but that was some of the discussions that Brian and I had related back to these discussions I'd had with Martin Smith, who had these big, who was really interested in these, like, what you can draw from social media, which is seen as kind of a, I don't want to say wisdom of crowds, but definitely crowd metrics. So it was also interesting talking with Amanda this week about nonlinear EEG analysis, we talked a little bit about psychosis, and I've finally found that. So digging out an old data set and some analysis that I've done with the recurrent network analysis, which is a nonlinear technique, and we can talk about its utility in weather modeling, but then it's like its utility in brain network analysis, and explainable. The problems that nonlinear EEG analysis have in terms of explainability that have held it back as a technique. Hoping to get something out, so we have some examples to play with, and you can see that. And I just found that, and Madeline Lancaster talked this week, which was really interesting because switching to organoids, and it was helpful because she talked about her most reproducible protocol, which was nice because she was responding to somebody else about are these protocols reproducible, and she said they were definitely on a spectrum. Some are harder than others, and so it was interesting though that she settled on this choroid plexus protocol as her most reproducible. But so that was interesting, and it was really interesting because I asked her the question about the stress effects that UCSF had kind of put out there in terms of their UCSF's articles seem to actually focus on other people's work in the sense that what they thought were confounds to that, and that these organoids are unnatural, and by that they just mean that it looks like the cells are stressed, and nobody's, or it's kind of difficult to people mean different things by that, but it was interesting because when she tackled it, what she was trying to get across, I think what she was trying to say was that this is why you need your automated tweezer single cell analysis system, because you really need to you need to check the morphology of the cells. She was saying that the morphology, the cellular morphology, is indicative of is some sort of marker of the stress. So abnormal morphology should tell you something. And I think that was there was a talk again, like this was last fall at IGI over in Berkeley, the Innovative Genetics Institute. That the laser system, it's like a startup, but they're using these friggin' lasers to do this super rapid, high throughput cell sorting, and it seems like that was what they knew that this was the problem and this was the issue that you'd have to address. But it was interesting too, because she was saying that it is a problem. That if you're not controlling for that, absolutely that these protocols are open to. Well, she was saying that the difficulty. She was saying that the cord plexus. Oh, sorry.
Start moving towards some other discussions, just so we can go.
I'm getting
more
too later. So it was helpful.
General update.
Sure, it was a great talk, but I think in terms of protocol design, we should stick with just as close to Alison Motry's and Bradley Wojtek's original protocol, and just try and recreate that at this point.
Yeah.
Because just getting the electric phase data would be.
We can have a very in-depth discussion about brain organoids in a little bit, but this is kind of just general updates from both this week. So
and that's my update.
Okay. Yeah.
So I know Amaris, you're going to be you were ready to do presentation soon. I want to give you an on-deck cue for that. Bradley, did you have any? I know you've done a lot of things this week yourself, but any updates that you want to share?
I don't have any updates. I am going to present on the systems, Systems Neuroscience and Evolution thing, and then again, I've been busy with GSoC. I think that's shaping up very nicely, the GSoC project, and so we're gonna, this is something that we'll be building on this summer, and then, like I said, we had a group 3 years ago. In fact, it was the genesis of this group that led to a paper that's about to be published in Artificial Life. And, it was it was the way Jesse got into the lab. So, I want to kind of recreate that sort of thing in this group with this summer with, our people here. And we're trying to really kind of attack this problem sort of in a complementary way. So, I know that Brian has a certain perspective, and Hussein has a certain perspective, and Himanshu has a certain perspective, to bring those together in a way that's complementary, and that we can, maybe write a big paper on it, and then also maybe have a set of tools that we can give to people for their open source communities, and it should be. I think it should be very productive. So, and then I don't think I have anything else to report about. Anything else right now, but I'm done.
One thing I wanted to mention about the School of Summer Code is that if people are interested in it, could they basically do what I did and sort of tag along, if they weren't accepted in the program or whatever like that?
Yeah, I think if you, right.
Sorry.
Yeah, that was kind of the plan, and then we got all of our spots. Happened, and so. But yeah, if you're interested, we meet Fridays at 12 noon Eastern time, which is, I don't know what that is in UTC. It's like 5 hours ahead of that. So, if you want to attend the meeting, you're welcome to join. It's at this link, and we'll be going through the projects individually, and then we'll be having a little bit of discussion about data sources. So there are two parts of the project: the data part and the simulation part, and I wanted to put a specific emphasis on data because it helps you validate the models that you're building, and B, it's something that people don't talk about a whole lot. As I said in the meeting yesterday, a lot of people will, the extent of data use in a lot of open source contexts is to see like analytic dashboards. You see where, what's going on in the last year, what's interesting, are there little spikes in things, and that's it. And that's not really hugely, I shouldn't say that no one does it. I'm saying that it's typically not done. There is a emerging research community of people who are doing open source data and looking at contributor data and trying to understand that a little bit more. Last summer I attended a workshop at NetSci, which is a conference for network science, and it was they called it Net Open. So it was a workshop on like open source communities, collaborative groups, and how you could apply different methods to that. So there's an emerging research topic here too. And so if you're interested, join our group and we can talk. We'll probably talk about it, on and off in this group as well. But I wanted to have a separate meeting for that.
Yeah, it's going to be its own thing. Also, the slightest bit of chagrin for me, in a positive sense, because I'm so happy. Like, for the last few years, I've applied and I've done things, and there wasn't we didn't even get any slots at all. So that everybody's here, it's great. So we're gonna have all the people. I think it actually was a great experience the first time because I got to learn with Stefan and Z and Ankit, a different Ankit, earlier Ankit. I believe it was Ankit, right?
Yes.
And it really more from this nice 3+ pronged approach to what we were talking about, and I think that could happen again. And even looking at the Diva Worm stuff. So I think that'll be really a very interesting cohort for the summer to pass through. So yeah, that'll be cool. Excuse me, that'll be cool. I think that's it for our general updates. We can go into, I'm sure, more in-depth conversations later about some specific things. But unless there's anything else, I might turn the floor over to Amaris. I know you wanted to present some things today. If you're up for that now.
Okay, my Wi-Fi's been a little finicky, so I'm sorry if it goes out. But
Okay.
You guys all see that?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So I'm just gonna briefly it's about information theory, but I'm gonna focus more on Claude Shannon and how we ended up with the whole information theory itself. So there was a documentary available on the Slack channel for information theory, but unfortunately, within the span of the last 2 days, it got taken down by the IEEE because I guess they weren't the ones that posted it, but I thought they were. So confusing, copyright. But it is available on Amazon Prime, but you have to rent it for $3, which it's I don't know if you want to spend $3, but you can. But I did find an alternative video. This is by the IEEE. It's from 14 years ago, though. At least that's what the YouTube said. So it's still about him. It's not his life changed in the span of 14 years. But I'll probably post it in the Slack. But it's here too if you want to just see what it's called.
Yeah. If people are particularly good, I do have ties to IEEE, and we can find a way to do it or get a way to do it. But that happens with YouTube. But I think it's great that you looked into all this. So
yeah,
I'm happy to hear what you say.
Okay, so Claude Shannon, or Claude Elwood Shannon, which I think is a really cool middle name, but not relevant. So he was born in 1916, and then he lived in the Middle East, sort of Middle East, not the Middle East, sorry, the Midwest. I was sorry. The Midwest, which a lot of information theorists believe was really relevant for the time because, so much in terms of inventions was happening at the time. and he's actually distantly related to Thomas Edison, which he was always super proud of, but he didn't find that out until later in life. So unfortunately, he did die in 2001, which, he had a pretty short life. He was like in his 60s, I believe. I don't know math, so I'm going to assume that's 60.
He was 84. Well, 85.
85?
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Close. 20 years away. So he studied math and electrical engineering. He got his master's at MIT, but even though he studied math, he wasn't really considered a mathematician by other mathematicians because he focused more on practicality and like he was more into like fiddling with machinery, so the engineering side of his degree. So after he graduated from MIT, he was like, like a lot of college students like me right now, was like, what do I actually do with my life? Like I have a degree, but what do I what do I do? So he ended up seeing a flyer throughout MIT that was looking for an electrical mechanics research assistant at MIT. So he applied and he got in. So he was a research assistant, and then his research ended up focusing on mechanical switches. So it's basically like the on-off switch of the light, like just how it works, and the fact that he was really interested in the ones and zeros. So 1 is true and 0 is false. So it's the idea that if 1 + 1 = 1, so if I give you a true statement and another true statement, then it equals a true statement if I combine the two. So which is like every test ever, whenever you take which one of these is true, which one of these is false, so he's tricking you. So I always found that funny. But his master's thesis, he ended up focusing his master thesis on this, and so it was called the symbolic analysis of relay and switch circuits. So he basically was focusing on how information was stored and transferred, which was interesting enough because he was really interested in the meaning, like the actual math behind information, because we always like feelings is not really quantitative in the same way that numbers are. So he was basically like, we can attribute math to information. It's not like something abstract like feelings or emotions or thoughts. Like you can actually do math to figure out how information works. So he ended up working in Bell Labs during the war, and that in a way he was appeared that he was kind of guilty for doing it because he did it as a way of getting out of the war. So he worked for the government to, on information, which was something he liked, but he didn't do it out of, wanting to help the war efforts. It was more as an escape, but he still had his own interests. So he kind of like, I don't want to say tricked the government, but he kind of got away with, doing research that was slightly related to what his actual interests were. So at first he ended up focusing on, I think it was like fire switches. I forgot. It was basically the mechanism behind like the weapon, like fire control. Yeah, thank you. So, but he ended up convincing them to switch into the cryptography division, which he was interested in and which was his master's was focused closer to. So he did that, and then even though he was doing the cryptography work at Bell Labs, whenever he went home, he did his own research on information theory. So he did that all by himself and like in secret because he thought like it wasn't like he was afraid of getting caught. It was just it wasn't what he was hired to do technically. So he did that. And then the documentary is really good. So I'm like, again, if you don't want to pay $3, I'll try to simplify it. But, I liked it. This is a quote that I thought, like, it's kind of a mashup of two separate sections, but it's a quote of what he is presumed to say. I don't know if it's a direct quote or not. I'm assuming it was, though. It goes, how you make something unintelligible or how you make something intelligible are two sides of the same coin. Information, which they call intelligence at the time, was a slippery concept. I wanted to try and find a way to treat information like a physical thing, like energy that you could measure. What I realized was, to measure information, you have to look at it without regard to meaning. Content is irrelevant. The point to send a message is to remove uncertainty, something you didn't know, but now you know. So the whole thing with that information is like, I'm saying all this stuff when I could have just simplified it in like 2 words. Mostly because, I'm nerding out a little, but also because, the English language is super redundant. like, especially now we have emojis and we have, like, you know, abbreviations for words, and that's kind of related to what he was going towards, because he was like, we say all these things where we can say like 2 words and it'll get to the point. Like, you know, we have so many extra letters and extra words for no real reason. Like we use the in between words, but, you know, it's not really necessary. But I can just say go left instead of, you know, go towards this and do all that. So so he was intrigued by trying to figure out what the smallest, like, amount of bits, or, like, you know, smallest level of information can be set and still get the point across without seeming like, without losing the intelligence behind the word. So he's still able to understand what is being said, if that makes sense. So so the way his mind worked, which is so fascinating to me, is that he would take the big picture and, like, break it down into little tasks, so that when you put it all together, it solve the situation without you really realizing it. So it's like tackling a huge project by doing little steps in between. So that's kind of like how he tackled information theory. So besides being known for like entropy, so like the smallest amount of information or bit needed to send a message, he also was known for, like, basically setting up the fundamental limit, also called the Shannon limit or the Shannon capacity. So after his mathematical theory of communication paper in 1949, he kind of not really steered away, but, like, he kind of took a step back from the actual research, like, you know, public research side of information theory. So, but behind the scenes, he was still focusing on, like, you know, bits and, you know, how that. Oh, I'm sorry, 1 second, my dog is. I'll be right back.
Okay. Okay, this is pretty good. It's interesting that she mentioned that Shannon's, you know, originally said that you have to measure information without meaning. But in the field of information theory, since Claude Shannon, people have used semantic content as a measure of information as well. And I don't know too much about, like, the state of the art of that, but let's just say that, like, there's a in the field, you know, after Claude Shannon, there's been a sort of a move to look at the semantic content of messages, but using essentially the same mathematical framework. So that's kind of an interesting thing.
The documentary also really emphasizes how much he worked on, like, games, like just worked on his own stuff.
Yeah.
like, yeah. What's this? Oh, that's just a game I've been building. They talk about toy episode.
I'm back. I'm sorry. I actually love that. I was like, he's like a big kid, which I could relate to so much. But so the way the bit kind of worked was, he was like, at first he was like, what's the smallest, like, information source I can transmit and then still get it across to the receiver with them completely understanding, like, you know, what's being transmitted. So when this all started from the time he was a kid, honestly. Like, you know, he was always fascinated about, you know, making inventions that, you know, could let him talk to his friends. So basically a walkie-talkie. Like, he invented a walkie-talkie. It didn't work the first time when he was a kid, but, you know, eventually it worked. So it's just like that transmission of information, which, you know, like, at the time there wasn't even, like, the computer like we have today. It was an analog computer, so it was like this big weird machine that, you know, looks kind of freaky when you're, like, just staring at it. But so anyway, so the smallest unit, like the smallest bit, was kind of representative of uncertainty. So I found it interesting because it was like the whole thing with language and information is, so it's not really predictable in most cases. Like, there's certain times when there's like a significant level of uncertainty, so it's trying to make information predictable in a way. So it's like if I say cranberry soda cantaloupe, you have no real idea of what I'm going to say next because it's just, as far as you know, it's like random words. But it's like, the whole thing with information is if I have all this information or I gather as much information as I can, it becomes less uncertain, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So the whole thing with the Shannon limit, it was like this idea that you could like once you reach that maximum, you would have perfect communication, or you could you could transfer perfect communication with little to no errors. So I could say anything in the world, but you would kind of be able to understand it, or form a connection between it, sort of. Like, it's kind of how I understood it. But so he believed the maximum bits per second that could reliably resolve the uncertainty of a message when faced with noise. So I loved the analogy they made. Like, he made it first, but a lot of information theorists were making this analogy. It was the idea of having an argument with your spouse. So if you're both yelling, or there's a lot of noise, like let's say you're in New York City and it's like honking outside and you're both having an argument. If there's a lot of noise, it's not really gonna make the transfer of information easier. And if you're both yelling, it's not gonna get your point across any easier. So it's kind of like the idea of like being calm and saying what you have to say without, trying to force it, if that makes sense. Like, information or communication isn't made any easier by yelling or clearer. So it's like being able to create a dialogue or send information without forcing it in a way.
Right.
And so he says this in like they mentioned this in the beginning of the documentary, and they kind of, I don't know if it was intentional, but they kind of repeat it, and it was the idea of finding patterns. Like, that's the key. Like, there's patterns in everything, really, and that's kind of in a way, without directly formulating any of the inventions that we know today, like the phone or the computer, he kind of pushed that forward without having to do it himself. Even though I really think he could have, he just didn't. Like, he was too lazy, I think. In a little way, he was kind of like, yeah, other people can do it. I don't have to waste my time when I could do, like, be a big kid. Like, I could have fun, like, doing things I'm interested in.
Right.
So it's like the idea of efficiency. So it's like, without doing the most, you can still, go so far. Like this, I kind of titled it right here. It's like simplicity and complexity are two halves of the same coin. Like, without over analyzing something, you can still, figure out the bigger picture. Like, it's not as complicated as we try to make it out to be. Oh, I'm sorry, my dog's back.
I posted some things in the Slack in a conversation with Morgan, but it was like some pictures of a crossword puzzle that were half finished. And the idea there would be, if you put in like the key parts of the pattern, if you lay them in, you can kind of infer what the rest of the crossword puzzle is going to look like. If you just put the parts down randomly, you won't necessarily be able to figure out what that looks like. And so that's sort of the key of information theory, is if you can figure out the main parts of the message, or, that sort of thing, then you can actually infer the rest of the message. So if I give you enough letters in like a game like Wheel of Fortune, you can guess the word. If the letters are the right letters, if they make sense, if they're unique enough. And so that's kind of one of the key things in information theory, is that you have these patterns that kind of emerge. There are things that are unique to different strings or different visual patterns, and it allows you to correctly infer things. So
yeah, like there's another video on the Slack. It's about Wordle, which I thought was also really interesting. So it's like, it's because when you're playing the game yourself, you're like, what is this word? I can't figure it out. And then when you see it, you're like, oh.
Yeah.
Like, it stumps you, but it's like, the mind is like, it's complex, but it's not in a way. Like, like the brain is super complex. Like, when you're looking at it, like, we still don't know how it really works. But it's like your mind is able to do these things that, at first seem so like stumping, like, and confusing, but it's really not when you really take a step back, which I think was really interesting about Claude Shannon, because he was like, he didn't take life too seriously if that makes sense. Like, he wasn't trying to solve world hunger, some complex problems, but he was still able. I'm sorry. He was still, still thinking about these little things, like, which I think also separated him from mathematicians, because they were all focused on the past, where he was still thinking about the future and the practicality of what he was doing.
Yeah, that's great. So are those all your slides, or?
Yeah, I try to make it quick. I was kind of like upset by the fact that YouTube took it down, but
yeah, it's okay.
I was like, oh.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you for that. Yeah, and so you want to continue your interest in this area. Maybe we'll talk about a little bit more about, like, how you can, and actually, you have also done a similar sort of perspective on the thing you presented at the AI ethics conference
at New York Celebration
Yeah.
of Computing
Yeah.
with Tim and stuff.
Yeah, Timnit.
So, yeah, I think that's great. This is I think this is your first like major like flash talk presentation here in the lab. So congratulations on that. You contributed to the stuff at New York Celebration of Computing, and also like, are you? I just wanted to ask, like, Amaris, you're going to be a sophomore next year? Is that right? Or what are you at in U Albany?
No, I actually graduated, so I'm like job hunting. So I might be
awesome.
less available, but like I have an interest in the topics, so I'm hoping to stay up to date with like the weekly meetings, but I don't know.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So feel free to like, I'll mention some things later, but like, there's definitely opportunity to kind of continue looking down that road with things. This well, to stick to this right now, this is great. I would say all those things are really interesting to think about and follow up on. And as we kind of talk about and explore stuff, the more it's really interesting to think about. At least for me, you kind of hear about these like older, particularly in the past, because you kind of think of, when you think about scientists or like philosophers in the past. When I like earlier in life, I kind of had this sort of monolithic image that they were all just like these really, really sort of like people who thought a lot about stuff, and like sort of the older white guy vibe of like, this person very ahead in the clouds or whatever. And they didn't really have a lot of, it was harder to understand like the personality of like Aristotle or Pythagoras or like these different like figures from the past. But in reality, like Claude Shannon's personality versus Norbert Wiener's personality versus like, Thomas Edison and these other folks, they all have different personalities. And so it's like, I think it's, there's an archetype of like Albert Einstein with the big hair and just sort of the crazy face, and I'm a really weird guy and I study this. And like, that's true, but there's a lot of really different takes to approach research, and you'll find that the more you go, like there's a huge breadth of personality and like approaches, and a lot of them are contradictory. But it's kind of finding out what you want to do, and if you can get lucky to focus on what you want, and if you want to approach it in a way that Claude Shannon did, that can lead to great things. And I think it's a really interesting topic to consider, like the human aspect of it too. But yeah, so any other thoughts or concluding thoughts? Or I know there will be opportunities to follow up on that in terms of some cognition future stuff I'll mention later, but definitely curious to see where that goes.
Yeah.
And people maybe mention that too.
I just want to say I completely agree with your point of view, Jesse, because I don't know why I'm obsessed with like people watching, because it's so interesting when you meet people and like you just get a feel for their personality. Like, I don't want to sound creepy, but so it's like, because when you're observing people, or like even like you said, they're like from like a modern point of view, they're kind of like these old white dudes who were just smart, like they're geniuses, like of course they figured this out. But then when you really get to like delve into like their thought process and like who they were, it kind of gives you an idea that of like, you know, like they're regular people. It's just, you know, they had an interest and they kind of tackled it in a way that, you know, at their, especially at the time, like, you know, nowadays you'd be like, yes, of course you would think about it that way. But back then it was like so against the norm. So it's just interesting.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah, and like this is a bit of a a critical theory of history and science comment, but like a lot of people who've done a lot of the things that we talked about have had a lot of opportunity to do them, and so certain ways of thinking, doing things are a bit, you know, overrepresented in that. So thinking about ways by which you can let other people, like one of my big things is like, how do we get people to the table? How do we get a lot of different perspectives and eyes on it? Because we're going to need that to build what we need to build to have a future, basically, is my view. But I think a lot of, and we'll talk, this is, I'm heavily foreshadowing what's about to come next, which is kind of like,
Okay.
talk a little bit about our lab in terms of the open source stuff and our education component and why we're doing that. So yeah, good to keep in mind all the factors at play as to how and why certain things come about. So yeah, that was great. Any other comments, or what do we want to do for the rest of the meeting? Also, Brad, I know.
Yeah, I'm gonna do a presentation. I wanted to hear about Morgan's stuff, and then you're gonna present. And Amanda posted something in the chat here. Work of fiction that I think you'd enjoy, When We Cease to Understand the World. So that's a nice. I think it's a book. So check that out. So why don't we go to Jesse? Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, do you want me to go next?
Yeah, you go. You can go next, and then Morgan can go, and then I'll go.
Okay. One thing I may actually, I'll just end it now because I'm live streaming or attempting to live stream,
Okay.
and it's gonna be just a big awkward noise. So everybody, like, if you're wearing headphones and have things turned up, take a moment to relax and stretch, because it's gonna be for the next like 20 seconds. There'll be one loud noise and then another loud noise. So here we go. 3, 2, 1. Stopping live stream now.
Live streaming has stopped.
There you go.
Out, you know, relax your shoulders or whatever you want to do. Now let's see. I don't know if it's going to let me actually restart right away.
Oh, you're gonna restart. Okay.
We're about to find out. Because they can only let you do an hour, but then it might cut me off at like 5 minutes anyway.
Live streaming is on.
I think just to only let you do like a little bit over an hour a day or something weird like that. So I will likely get interrupted and it'll be disappointing because it'll be really awesome. Anyway, so as I mentioned earlier in the Slack, and as I've talked about for a bit, we're kind of at a crossroads. We're now in a new era. Well, a new season, literally and figuratively, I suppose, mostly literally. And I'm going to present a presentation about our summer outlook at Orthogonal Research and Education Lab. I know, breathtakingly cool. You can see this, I think?
Yes.
Okay. And again, I do expect to be kind of blown up by that streaming voice again, because I just think it's going to happen.
All right.
Hold on. It's getting interruptions and stuff. So, okay. Hi, I'm me. And then, you know, you're here at Orthogonal Research Education Lab. This is an outlook for the next few months, basically.
Yes.
Overview is the next few months, some key dates and times. We have a world premiere of a certain image that's been long awaited. And then talking about our active projects, some delivers opportunities, some standby or developing projects. And then I wanted to just put a really clear request or call for involvement type stuff, or if you need help supporting a supporting or planning on a project, all that will be kind of later. But yeah, starting off just with some really general time windows ahead. Welcome to summer 2022. We're basically in that semester or that season or whatever you want to call it now. Congratulations again to you all winning interns. You made it through. It's been really great to have you. Hope we'd have you around for a bit, but like, I want to hand out a medal or a thumbs up saying like, hey, like you were with us for the whole spring. You did some stuff that's great. Thank you for being here. Google Summer Code, and also like I forgot, I misunderstood who graduated or didn't, but like if you graduated, congratulations. That's awesome to be moving on. Google Summer Code starts this week. You probably heard a lot about it. I'll defer most of that to Bradley, but just to kind of mention it really quickly. May 20 all the way up to September, there's going to be Google Summer Code going on. So it's going to be, just so you know, or like if you're not involved in it, you can hear what's this Google Summer Code stuff. There's going to be updates and things about it for a while. Mostly in the other group that will be discussion, but just so you know, there will be periodic overlap for the next few months about that. Neuromatch. The folks are either going to be mentors or TAs. Some of the people who are in the lab but are not currently here in this meeting. I don't know if Rashab and or Ankit is doing it again. They may be teaching assistants at that event. I think Brian got in. I got in. I think Bradley's. Are you doing a mentorship again?
Yes, I'm mentoring for the computational neuro. So
computational neuro, great. So yeah, there's 2 courses for that. They're both happening in basically mid to end July, and then We Robot is basically happening. The event's in mid-September, but we have until August 8th to finish off our things for that. So these are not the only things that are going on, but just like to give you a kind of a view, a single view, not the only view. Like this is kind of where we're at. Like we've got a lot of these things are all definitely happening. Will be kind of major things in the lab going forward. Just to keep that in mind. So we'll get into more specifics next. Well, here. Just some. We've had a Google Calendar before for the lab. I can restart that if people think that might be useful for them. It's really not. It sounds great, but then a lot of people don't really use it. So I don't know if it really is a big deal or not. And I would just say before anything else, any like timeline questions that people have right now about what I've said. I don't think there's anything too complicated, but if you have any questions about, I want to do this at this point, feel free to do that. I can't see any hands, so I'll be going by people's voices, but I assume going once, going twice, no questions. Okay. Let's see what's next. So what's going on in orthogonal research education lab? I'm preparing the world premiere of the document, or the image, I suppose. But just as a background, as we know, orthogonal is super interdisciplinary. There's a lot of things going on. It's kind of in the name. It's kind of not in the name of orthogonal. But when I joined the lab, let's put it that way, like three so years ago, the main things were representational brains and phenotypes. That's sort of our core, theme, subgroup. I don't really know how to refer to it. Like I just call them banners right now. Like we have now basically 5 different banners, I would say, that a lot of things fall underneath. But that was sort of the main one. That was developmental brain vehicles, the agent-based modeling you'll see next. We also have education and epistemological directories, which is like both the teaching component and also a sort of a, creating these sort of directories of knowledge, like maps, knowledge maps, and everything else, and ways of cataloging information. We have our sister group, DevoWorm, which is very developmental biology focused, or C. elegans, and related to OpenWorm. And then we've always been open source and open science. And in the last 3 years since I've been here, I've kind of helped bring about a couple other things, like the Cognition Futures team, which is maybe more specifically focused on certain aspects of discussing like cognitive science related stuff, and the society ethics and tech team, which that was kind of our big focus at the start of the year. We were preparing for a New York Celebration of Women Computing, which is a thing we go to for a long time, and then a lot of the AI ethics focus and that whole thrust in the lab has been, I'm really happy to see that take off. But it's like, how do you show this to other people? Like, people come to the lab, it's been very difficult to visualize what this looks like. So I put this together officially, finally, last night. I've had many drafts of it for a while, and it's a very incomplete map. Not all of our topics are covered, but here's sort of a look at what's going on in the lab. And you have these huge 5 banners at the top. You have a lot of topics that are not conclusive. You have some implements in purple, like things we put out into the world that you can interact with or join or be a part of. And then a very, very, very incomplete list of places or venues we've presented at or groups we've worked with, like from Artificial Life, we have ReRobot, Cognitive Science Society, New York Celebration of Women Computing, all these different events. And then our external partners, obviously Google Summer Code, OpenWorm, a related DevaWorm, INCF, University of Albany with our internship program and folks here, NeuroMatch, Plot Twisters, and others. So this is super incomplete, but you can kind of see, these are not, you could draw lines. I was going to draw lines like to these things at one point, but it's like, there's just so much overlap, and there's so much orthogonal and in a direct or ironic way of what's there. Like Cognition Futures goes through all these things, and there's not very, very clear boundaries, but like it's a really cool thing. But I do think sort of education open sources is at the center of it, if there was such a thing as the center in this case.
Right.
But that's it's a fairly good thing. And open, like, what's your anything you want to say so far, Bradley? Because I know I'm kind of just throwing all this out there.
Oh, yeah, this looks pretty good. The only thing is, technically, the venues would be on the side, wouldn't they? Because you have venues interacting with, like, the partners and external collaborators would be on the side. Because they interact with the venues and the projects and the banners. But I don't know. That's probably okay, though. The way you have it.
It's sort of like this could be arranged a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
And so I'm very open to changing that around. Like this could be like a whole other angle of it.
I like the way you've stratified it, though.
This is a sense of like, when we talk about Cognition Futures, it's kind of a general banner underneath orthogonal as a whole. DevaWorm is our sister group that has sort of separate meetings, but there's a lot of overlap. There'll be Google Summer Code overlap with them, and then these are sort of like 2 other like banners underneath here. So that's sort of a very broad, intuitive overview of what we're at. So great. That's questions and updates to that to come. Active projects that are happening, Google Summer Code, you probably already know about. That's closed for credit via Google. Like, you will not be getting any official Google funding at this time because it's done. But you can join along and be a part of the group if you so are interested in doing so. So there's still open involvement, but you won't be able to get Google stuff. Neuromatch Academy, I'm curious who will be attending this year because I don't know everybody yet. It is closed for applications, although like if you really, really, really wanted to get in, I probably could try to talk on your behalf to vouch for you. But otherwise, those are closed for applications, but there may also be a pre-course and potentially a slow pod afterwards. So there's actually a lot of ways to be involved in that over the year. That will depend a lot on interest and who wants to be a leader in that category too. But there's opportunity for that. And then We Robot, which is the conference. we were accepted at. That is open for involvement. I'm kind of leading a lot of that, those things. I'll mention in a little bit 2 of the projects that we are accepted for there. They're both going to be basically research posters. And just to designate, these are time-bound activities that have specific, the chart we saw earlier with the viewpoint, like the timelines. These are definitely happening. They're time-bound, and they're kind of things we have to kind of work around. So I'm kind of separating them out that way. Doesn't mean there are other things that aren't going on. It's just like those are sort of things we're obligated to do at this point, or will be more or less concrete that they're happening. If you don't know NeuroMatch, it's a really great community, very progressive, they got finally have a CEO to organize stuff. It came about during the pandemic era when everything got canceled and there were no neuroscience conferences, no cognitive science conferences, nothing. So a bunch of people came together to make it happen, and they're like, hey, this is great. And they had a really strong, beautiful community come together. It's like, why don't we do a NeuroMatch Academy? Originally just a conference, but it's an academy. So now there's originally just the computational neuroscience summer course, and now there's a deep learning summer course too to complement it. So it's a great thing, really great community to be involved with and help support out. You can volunteer. You can maybe not. You probably still could become a teaching assistant or a mentor if you know them. There's a strong need for if you know somebody who, like a professor who's looking to be involved in something this summer, or someone who has a lot of experience in these fields and would like to help out. They do get teaching assistants do get paid. So I'm sure they would still accept someone if you know someone who wants to help out. So the more teaching assistants, the more mentors they have, the more they can help. They can offer stuff to students. So it's a great thing, just a shout out for them, and just so you know. And then as far as We Robot goes, here's their imagery front page. We Robot's very interdisciplinary. They have legal, policy, ethical, economic, social, cultural aspects of robotics and artificial intelligence. So a lot of the people are talking about AI empathy, robot empathy. Stay tuned for that. That's kind of what we're doing it's a little bit related to what we're doing in one of our projects. But this is, I've never worked with them before, but I know it's kind of chaired by Ryan Callow, who's a really, really great, he's kind of a lawyer who focuses on this area, and I think it'll be great. I'm extremely excited to go there. I'm going to almost certainly be there in Seattle at that time, so that'll be really fun. Really quickly mentioning our 2 projects at this event. One is sort of cognitive interfaces focused. This is very theoretical, but like we're going to be focusing on, as another version for this will be like, what are leads we have towards having shareable cognitive interfaces? Not sharing minds, not uploading our mind into computers, but more like creating a virtual or augmented reality environment that we can sort of transpose or share between other folks, and where are we at with that, and what could we what's kind of on the frontier of that? If you always use frontier everywhere, but what do we do with that? And whoops, well, I guess I'll go here now. But project 2 is a bit more humanities focused in that this is a bit of a collaboration with Plot Twisters that's kind of inspired from our work with Plot Twisters, which is looking at how is someone's personal journey of relating to a lot of the deluge of information. Like we have so much information thrown at us in terms of how we're interfacing with the world. It's like how do you navigate that as a person trying to deal with either the different pressures, some of the power dynamics at play, and how this is affected by technology, and sort of like how are you mitigating all this stuff. It's a bit more personal and a bit more humanities focused and a bit more basically basically artistic in a way. But I'm really excited to work on that with Avery and Jenny and some other folks who've expressed some interest in that, and just bringing these different lenses of maybe like neurodiversity or different lived experiences, and how, in the context of all these things, like how do you navigate that? And if you don't know what plot twisters is, I don't think do I have it here? No, I don't. It's basically a kind of a play world, kind of almost similar to Claude Shannon in like his sort of creating these little like games and very play focused. But it's a play world. It's sort of like play world, like some Mr. Rogers Neighborhood vibe of like, let's go through these different cards and these sort of this make believe land where you can interface with parts of yourself and like look at some of your like, oh, I need care in this way, or I'm looking at my values and how do I process all that. So it's a bit like helping someone find their personal narrative and their personal journey. But this project is kind of combining that with a heavy sort of society tech ethics lens of how is our personal experiences being affected by the world at hand. So it's, again, a little bit different, but I think it'll be a lot of fun to work on that. Here are some other active projects that are going on that are less time-bound, but still ongoing. Cognition Futures Group, the group I mentioned earlier, we're open for involvement with that. I'm leading that. Currently, we have a reading group, which is meeting Wednesdays, looking at Varela, cognitive science methods, Ish, and Chimero. And we're going to be focusing on some of those methods ahead. We have a kind of a target goal for putting together maybe a paper about that for the next year's Embodied Cognition Conference or workshop or whatever it's going to be called, Embodied Intelligence, 2023. But there's also some sub-projects, and I wanted to really keep the door open for this because people have mentioned interests like AA and empathy. Both Sam and Sadhana have mentioned that, and I'm very open to trying to incorporate something specific about that, or even just build them out into, like, even people just want to do literature reviews about those things or read more papers and talk about them, like that's very much welcome to do that. Cybernetics information theory, we heard from Amaris, and there's definitely opportunity to continue with that ahead. People want to continue doing more in that area. Frontier Map is related, but kind of its own separate project. It is open. I'm helping that come out. Our aim is getting to a preprint and also implementation specifically in Obsidian, which I may have a screenshot of that next. But we do have help wanted on that. Looking at some literature review opportunities and some methodologies in like teaching and how people go about organizing information or exploring different fields of study. This is a bit more in the education segment. We're looking for like a little more to do in that area for sure. But it's also under a major project of like epistemological directories, kind of our education focus there, and sort of teaching and how do we teach, the pedagogy, how do we introduce people to new fields of study and interdisciplinary stuff. So that's all kind of related to that. This is just a look at our very outdated part of our outdated website from last year. We had CogSci 2021 for Cognition Futures. That was cool. This is a screenshot from, I think this is actually Amanda's document, but we're looking at the Dupraz and Varela book on that's the On Becoming Aware is this one here, but then we have a lot of ideas below that. I have a document too, but Amanda's is really cool. And then Frontier Map, this is a super, super general template of what we're looking at for a Frontier Map, but debates in a field, people in a field, key papers, events, techniques, discovery, ideas. I'll be fleshing this out in Obsidian, which you can kind of see in the background here, which is a great tool. I don't have anything to show for that right now, but I'm hoping to kind of get that across the finish line in the next few months, which will be a cool thing to do. And that's more like education and epistemological directories. And basically, Frontier Map should be a tool for helping people acclimate to key inflection points or debates within an arena. And so how do we do that, basically? Standby and potential projects. Leadership opportunities are available. Brain organoids. And this is kind of this is open involvement. This is sort of an evolving thing we're talking about. Obviously, Morgan's super involved in that. And Bradly, we're determining feasibility and some project structure and some related timelines for that. So though if you're interested in that, there's a lot that's currently we've had. I think we had someone, Arthur, looking at some stuff in the past, going through a bunch of our links. We have a whole bunch of links, but it's sort of like a lot of structure we built out with this. So if you're interested, great. There's work to be done there, and you're welcome to join us for that. Philosophy subgroup, and yeah, we'll open. More can say more about this later. Philosophy subgroup is kind of related to the reading group as it is, but just kind of really making sure. Basically, I don't want philosophy to get lost because we're going to be doing a lot of stuff that's like really heavy coding stuff. We're going to be doing neuromatch stuff, and I want there to be a place for philosophy actively in what we're doing, even if it's like having our own additional meetings or groups about it. But like, I don't want it to be lost in the summer. So I just between that and between Amanda, I kind of mentioned Amanda like, hey, would you want to be involved in this and maybe have some other people focus specifically on this? So we have kind of a green light in that sense. It is kind of already ongoing. There's also a healthy. I really was excited by yesterday's meeting, unexpectedly, with the Google Summer of Code new crew who were like had a pretty good philosophy interest. The coding meetings will not be a lot of waxing poetically about philosophy, but they'll come up. So I think having an outlet for that will be good. Amanda might be interested in mentoring some folks, which is great. And also, again, kind of mentioning NeuroMatch Academy, our pre-course is Slow Pod. There could be stuff before it and after it, depending on interest. So we have a good relationship with NeuroMatch and NeuroMatch Academy. So again, opportunities there ahead. Here's the same slide. How about that? I think I was going to put something there, but I forgot it. So anyway, things to keep in mind, and I'm basically wrapping up here. Would you like help joining a project or setting up one of your own? Reach out to us. We can help you do that. There are many opportunities to meet outside of Saturday. So if you're not here, if you're not watching this, if you're following up on the internet or however you're viewing this, it doesn't have to happen today. We have many meetings and many people who don't come to these meetings that are involved in the lab. Calls for involvement. I will be writing up some calls for involvement specifically. This isn't really a call for involvement. This is more of an overview presentation. But if you would like help on a specific project, we can help you do that. Kind of related to the first bullet point, but there's stuff ahead, and we will be having some opportunities to try to get people to help on specific stuff too, or at least letting them know, hey, here's something you can specifically do within this project. Internships. I'm hoping to put together some solicitations for interns, both at UAlbany and in general the next few weeks. It probably won't be as robust as our previous spring plan, just because we have a lot on our plate currently, but I will be putting them out. So keep that in mind. If you know people who would want to join the lab, or if you're feeling more like you want to start up a project and you'd like people to join that, let us know. We can work with that. And finally, professional development and skill development. Is there anything folks would like to talk more about? Is there any skills or questions that you'd like to address or get better at? There is some technical overlap with Google Summer Code or NeuroMatch. We'll be talking about, probably more a little about reinforcement learning or other things of that nature that will come up. But there's other topics like just basic stuff too that if you're interested, you can mention. Writing or reading papers, dealing with advisors, dealing with lab managers, strange interactions like that, awkward people. That was a bit of a joke about me, just to be clear. But there's opportunity to say, hey, I would like to learn more about this thing too, and we do have a space to do that. We can center that in our meetings if you'd like to do that too. So that's pretty much a really rapid overview of things ahead. Very incomplete as well, but like those what's going on. And I will leave it at that and kind of just turn it over for questions or discussions if anyone has any questions about that stuff.
I think that was a pretty good presentation. Yeah, we went over quite a bit there. Why don't we talk about it in the Slack if we have questions? I wanted to move on to Morgan for a little bit, and then I'm going to present. It's already like half past the hour, so. Okay. Morgan, you had some things you wanted to discuss on brain organoids. Thank you, Jesse, for that presentation. That was good.
Stop. There we go. Is
All
it done that? Okay.
Yeah,
great.
yeah.
Cool.
Okay.
Yeah, I did. You know, if anything, I'd probably gone into it already too much.
Okay.
I mean, just in the Lancaster talk this week was great. You know, for kind of like the side comments that she had. You know, and yeah, so I've also been trying to catch up on the meeting videos. You know, so going over some of the beginning of the year videos. Like Arthur was asking for more focus for the Organoids, and we do anyway. The Organoids is definitely a longer term project where we need some wet lab space and equipment and things like that to really get going.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would just if there are others that are interested, that would be great. And there's a lot of overlap with. The organoid work has a lot of overlap. If you check out any of Michael Levin's work, there's also as well as the Diva Worm project, which I've started listening to those videos too. But yeah, this week I was really more doing lit review and trying to catch up on what new papers have come out in the last 4 months by most, which in organoid work is I would say really accelerating. If anything, like this, it's heating up. I think the certainly the most interesting was this week in terms of papers that practical papers was really the Pasca Stanford Labs work on biomaterials. And the other Madeline comment, Lancaster comment that was really nice was somebody asked her directly, like, how much does it cost to get into this? Like how much did you really? And she's like, oh yeah, okay, well we crunched the numbers, and it's about 1 pound, British pound, 1 pound per organoid, which I thought, I was like, yeah. Now she's definitely talking at scale, right? So it's but that was why the Pasca paper was great. So certainly the main focus for let's say for next Saturday is fleshing out a document that's just these are the things we need. But Pasca's lab and or the Stanford groups have funding to do educational workshops and to train people, right? To train people on this. And so I'm here. I'm push them to see when's the next workshop. Pushing Santa Cruz and the UCSF for the same things. And to some degree San Diego, with the caveat that Mutri's lab also has a startup, so they don't necessarily share that bioreactor details. Yeah. But and I wanted to just about Jesse's presentation. For the We Robot, something that came up in my mind was all the work that's going on in psychiatry right now, recognizing loneliness as an incredible problem, not only in older people, but actually in youth, and its health effects, its real detrimental mental and physical health effects, right? So just to emphasize the problem and how important are, if technology can play a role in addressing,
I think that's a very important topic, because we have this deluge of, you can be connected constantly, to anything, and on like all those Discord servers and unlimited YouTube videos. But exactly, like, what do you do with that, and how do you navigate that as a person in the modern world? I think that'll be a really interesting thing to talk about. So yeah, thank you. I would say more.
I think that would be a great thing to add, and to just show how absolutely important this is, and there was a group. I can check with Chris Madden and see, because I can't, I'll have to dig through my emails to find that meeting, but like, I know he and I attended this meeting in London, and it's a new area, it's an area of focus for both psychiatry and developmental psychologists, because again, this is happening in young adult, adolescents, and as well as older adults. Well, it's pervasive. It's pervasive. So yeah, and then I just wanted to, I hope it has some overlap with like NeuroMatch, but these EEG examples, or analysis examples, time series data examples, could be of use if anybody wants to play with them. And I'm just cleaning up the dependencies, or I'm getting something together that people can run, and yeah. So this is for kind of nonlinear time series analysis, but the data would then be ready for other things, and as I was. Well, sorry. This was a Noise Bridge meeting yesterday, where they were interested in doing EEG processing. Well, we've the package Deep Time. Sorry. So Steve Brunton's lab at UW. That really nonlinear time series analysis has a real explainability problem, or it's love to talk more about the problems of nonlinear time series analysis. And we make it practical. It will relate to the NeuroMatch. You'll see a lot of this kind of time series analysis, so that will be somewhat useful. And I think the nice thing about adding the deep learning is that what Brunton's been showing, and some of the professors that he works with, is that like deep learning is really useful for doing the feature engineering, and then using kind of traditional physics and computational fluid dynamics approaches to doing system identification.
Okay. Yeah.
So anyway, this will just be nice to have an example.
Yeah.
And so I've got a presentation on this recurrent quantification analysis or recurrent network analysis that's implemented in PyUnicorn. So the only dependency that's kind of like not scikit-learn or NumPy is PyUnicorn, which is from weather modeling.
Oh, okay.
And there was, so let me just jump into the Slack because there was some.
All right. Do you think you could present on that next week, or?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah. I've got it now, but I'm missing some of the images. Like I did the text separate from the images, and I'm trying to find the images
right, yeah.
that went with it. But it was somewhat of Amanda showed me a paper by Michael Breakspear on nonlinear analysis of psychosis, I think is what he called it, but what he really meant was nonlinear analysis of EEG.
Yeah.
Schizophrenia versus controls. And it's a bit of a I mean, like Breakspear's paper, it's a bit of an intro to nonlinear tech, like this is the, embedding theorem and, like going through the original like 1980s papers and like, what are these saying? That's what the Breakspear paper does kind of too. But then I've got some 128 channel data, and the really interesting thing is, of course, if you can combine dynamical systems analysis together with, but actually bring in multi-channel spatial aspects, and the weather modeling people are pretty good at that.
Yeah.
I mean, they care about these same things.
Right.
So I liked of the Diva Worm meetings. I really liked the paper. Is it Google Embryo?
Oh yeah, that paper.
And anyway, that observing something, 4D unfolding is what weather people really care about, and so these are some good tools, and there's some recent papers applying this to fMRI data that's actually kind of nice to do the same thing with EEG data. Right. I mean, there's actually something new there to be done. I mean, that was the original pitch. I did this about like 2 years ago.
Yeah. Well, that's great. So there's like during NeuroMatch, and I don't know exactly how it's going to unfold, but we're going to have like opportunities. There will be some. I'll be mentoring some projects, but people want to do say like a slow pod. There would be opportunities to incorporate that into something like a slow pod, where you just take the materials and you walk through them more slowly than what they do in the session, because NeuroMatch is basically 2 weeks, and they just kind of do it a fire hose method where they dump everything on you, and you have to struggle to keep up. So I don't, I think, if we did a slow pod, or if people wanted to do unpack certain topics, that would be good, and then to have that data set to work with during that period, that would be good.
And I just remembered what I was trying to remember about 5 minutes ago, which was the Nerd Data Without Borders hackathon that I posted. I think I posted in Slack. Sorry, I might have posted in NerdTechX in Slack.
Okay.
But let's check it out, because it's June 7th. It's like, I think it's June 17th or something like that.
Okay.
There's some people through NeuroTechX that are going to be, who are interested in participating. The reason that you care about that particular group is that their Nerd Data Without Borders is interested in dealing with the multiple kind of vendors of mostly animal recordings and intracranial recordings.
Right.
So so Nerd Data Without Borders kind of feeds into Dandy Archive, and Dandy Archive would be an even better source of data for NeuroMatch Academy and things like that.
Yeah.
So there's some low hanging fruit there. I've been talking with the Brains at Play people. Sorry, these are some neurotech kind of known groups, but yeah, even better than problematic high density EEG data from kids. Intracranial and animal recordings. Yeah, great stuff.
Yeah, definitely. Oh yeah, is Brains at Play?
Brains at Play. It is, or they do develop it for adolescents, but it's like video games plus brain recordings, right? So it's again kind of the same idea with our conversational AI, like the our conversational agent is trying to elicit behavior from we're trying to draw you into a conversation. The Brains at Play people are we're going to create this world that you're interacting with. So they do kind of like VR development together with actually making hardware.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So and these aren't the same people as Cognition, but really close. Like I put some of those developers in touch with Cognition for the software and stuff.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm reading the chat comment.
Oh yeah.
Jesse's chat comment.
Yeah, thank you for that. Looks like Amaris had to leave for today, so I'm gonna go into the recap of that event on Monday that we talked about earlier. This is the Braining Club. So let's see. So this was an event that was on Monday, Systems Neuroscience through the lens of evolutionary theory, and this is this Braining Club that meets online. They review a book by Streeter, George Streeter, who wrote who's done a lot of stuff on like neuroanatomy and the evolution of brains, and he wrote a book in 2006, sort of a textbook on this, and then he's written a more recent book on sort of, it's maybe a little bit more philosophical about brain evolution. So all these people listed here were at this event, and they had different perspectives on, from systems neuroscience. So Patricia Churchland's a philosopher. Lisa Feldman Barrett does a lot of stuff with, allostasis and with emotional states and other things. Barbara Finley's a neuroanatomist. Paul Cizek, we've talked about him in this group. Luis Pessoa, who's does cognitive neuroscience, and Joe Ledoux does a lot of stuff with emotions and other types of neurobiology. So this is what we call our shared notes document. So basically, I put this together mostly, taking screenshots of the different talks and the events, and then taking notes, where appropriate. So this is a really long document, but it's shared, I think, in the channel, one of the channels, I think the Bioevolution channel, or one of those, and it kind of goes through these different talks. So you can see that their topics they had a range of topics here, from Evo Devo to, to a little bit of AI, but mostly like some neuroanatomy, some regulation of the brain. There are other topics like the origins of the brain even. And this was based on a special issue of the Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society B. So, okay. So this was, there were a bunch of articles in this special issue. This one article here, Neuroscience Needs Evolution, that was, I think, they have like the first article, which is kind of a summary. This kind of summarized the special issue. And there were a bunch of different articles in this, and some of those article authors were here presenting at this event. And so this is a quote from Dobzhansky, who was an evolutionary biologist, and the quote is, "Nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution." And you see that quote all the time if you go to like evolutionary biology talks. But it really is sort of a statement that people, I think, really sums up this talk, the perspective that they gave here, which was that, nothing in neuroscience really makes sense unless you look at it through an evolutionary lens. And so, but the thing is when you think about neuroscience and evolution, you're not really asking like proximal questions like why does this, what constitutes a certain pathway, or what parts of the brain are active during some cognitive task. You're really asking longer term questions like how did we get an attentional system, or why do we have emotions the way we do? So they're why questions, they're how questions. And this goes back to some of the work from Nico Tinbergen in the 50s, where he laid out the four questions. And I'm not going to get into that paper, but basically it was the sort of trying to juxtapose a lot of behavioral observations that you see in like animal behavior and in neuroscience with more sort of ultimate questions or ultimate ways of looking at things, which involve like questions about evolution and questions about development. So, your brain is intact, you're behaving, there's activity in the brain, but it got there both through development. So one time you were an embryo and then you developed a brain, and that brain does things in the world. And that brain evolved across generations of individuals. So these are the questions that are distinct from sort of this cognitive perspective where you're talking about information processing, and you're talking about like neural activity, and you're talking about like different functions like attention and memory and things like that. And so they had a lot of different topics here. So this is a really long document. If you're interested, there's a link. I can repost the link on this. But there were a lot of really nice talks. I did want to go through a set of slides on this. So one of the things that they asked during the meeting, and one of the things that I think that should be addressed here, is that there are a lot of good things in the session, and it lasted about 5 hours. But there are a lot of things that are missing from like kind of what they were talking about, some of which just were cut for time, but some were maybe more fundamental. So this is again their header here. And then here are some screenshots from the different talks. So there were a lot of different talks on origins, on decomposing the brain into different phylogenetic, I wouldn't say categories, but Paul Ciszek has this theory where you start with a very simple brain, and then you can trace through phylogeny the emergence of different parts of the brain. And you can look at, those parts of the brain as sort of being a template for other things that are built on top of it. So, for example, at some point we evolved a hippocampus that appears in some part of the tree of life, and then the hippocampus is repurposed in different ways. And then, where the medial temporal lobe, which the hippocampus is a part, would emerge at a certain point in phylogeny, and then you would have these different variations on it. I mean, that's basically the idea presented here. Other people talked about, the origins of the brain, the origins of synaptic proteins, things like that. And that was kind of interesting because sometimes we talk about basal cognition, which is like, where does cognition begin in the tree of life? And it may be that it's very basal or it's very early in the tree of life that it emerges. There are other things here. You see different slides. So this is the Braining Club YouTube channel. You can go to that. They have this actually on the YouTube channel as the session recording, and then this is the shared notes document. So they covered a number of topics: comparative neuroanatomy, niche construction, and what I like to call allostatic brains, which is where the brain is sort of an allostatic machine, or an allostatic structure that's regulated into different states. So niche construction was something that was mentioned. They have a very specific perspective of what they call the extended synthesis. So this is incorporating Evo Devo, niche construction, and everything into a perspective that goes beyond what people typically think of when they think of evolution, which is what they call the neosynthesis, which involves looking at population genetics and phylogeny. But again, as I'll mention, that maybe that needs to be re-engaged with more, because I didn't think they engaged with it enough in this session. They talked about embodiment, but they didn't really talk about it enough. I know if Jesse had been there, that's all we'd talk about is embodiment. But they talked a little bit about it, they kind of paid it lip service. But, thinking about like embodiment and evolution, you have organisms that have a body, and those bodies change, and the brain changes. And the question is, does the body change with the brain and so forth? So, in the original Streeter book from 2006, Streeter talks about this a lot. And he talks about sort of like how the brain will innervate the tissue of the body. And it'll find target tissues to innervate. So if you notice that your own body, you have certain parts of the body where you have more nerve endings than others, like in your hands and in your tongue and in your face. Those areas are innervated in a pattern that is consistent with representations of the brain in the brain. So there's this, in the sensory motor cortex, there's this representation of your body. You have all these nerve endings in different parts of your body, and it maps to this part of cortex that interprets the inputs as pain or as sensitivity. So you can do a lot of things. You can integrate feelings over space. You can feel pain more acutely. These are things that have evolved. And so what will happen in development is you get these target tissues that are parts of the body, and the nerve endings will innervate those areas, and they'll innervate them at different densities. So there's actually that nice connection between embodiment and evolution and development. That they didn't mention this actually at all in the session, but it was an important thing to think about. Also phylogenetics. They talked a little bit about phylogenetics. Paul Cizik talked about phylogenetics, but he didn't. There was some methodological contention, and this is a very contentious area. In evolution, you'll find that people will talk about, like, especially people who do cladistics. They have their own terminology for evolutionary change, and people in general, when they talk about phylogenetics, they argue about things like the origin of traits, the shared origin of traits, and most importantly, parallel evolution, or what they call homoplasy. And, sometimes if you go to a systematics conference, they'll just have knockdown, drag-out fights over what's a trait, where those traits are in the tree, if they're independently evolved. And, so this is not just a matter of easily observing a change in state. This is something that people argue about incessantly. This is more, in the case with morphological features, actually what we're dealing with here, rather than gene sequences, but still with genetics with gene trees you can still have this. So this methodological contention wasn't drawn out as much as it could have been. Maybe that's a good thing. Non-neuronal cognition. So Joseph Ledoux mentioned the origins of cognition in the brain, but this non-neuronal cognition thing came up, but it wasn't there wasn't a whole presentation on it. And then the evolution of morality and the selfish gene perspective was mentioned by Patricia Churchland, and she mentioned that they in philosophy they have had this conception of morality, and it was just based on kind of observations of human behavior, but you can observe brain evolution and the evolution of different hormones, and that can actually inform you in different animal models as to how morality evolved and sort of its roots in humanity. So they didn't cover a number of topics. They didn't really get in too much into the teleology and selectionism debates. So teleology is this idea that change is something that is, that it's sort of guided by some force. And teleology is a specific idea that there's progress in evolution. So that, evolution is progressive. You start simply, you end up with something more evolved, and, that there's something guiding it. There's definitely, a lot of times when people use teleological arguments, it has its precursors in religion. So, it's not something it's something that's been a bone of contention, and it's something we carry with us. Because even if we're not explicitly religious, we kind of still think about this as a thing that a great chain of being, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So there's this tension, and neuroscientists have a particularly interesting relationship with teleology, because neuroscientists will think about behavior, and then they'll think about evolution, and they often conflate the two, in that behavior may be progressive, but evolution may not be. And so there's this baggage from, say, Lamarck, who was a person who was pre-Darwin, who kind of developed this idea that evolution was driven by teleological behavior, and he is proven to be wrong, but that still carries on. They didn't have a lot of formal theoretical models. They didn't talk too much about inheritance, which is a key part of evolution. They talked about evo-devo, but they didn't really give a formal model. And they didn't really talk about computational agents. So this is something we talk about in this group, but they didn't mention it at all. They didn't talk about population thinking. There's this three-legged stool of evolutionary biology: tree thinking, which is the phylogenetic approach; homology thinking, which are these common shared characters; and then population thinking, which is where you have not just one individual, but many individuals. And so in neuroscience, we often think of individuals as one, or maybe a small homogeneous population. And in evolution, that's actually not the way to think. You need to think about a diverse population that has structure, but most importantly has a lot of constituents that reproduce and produce new generations. So this is something that it wasn't really talked about explicitly. So these are examples of population thinking. You have a lot of mice here that Hough is maybe eating these mice selectively. Maybe they have darker, lighter coats, so they're just picking them off from the environmental background. This is driving selection in the mice, environmental selection. These hawks in turn exist as a population. They're able to eat mice, and if the mouse population falls, then the hawk population may also fall. And so they can affect, things that happen in one population can affect, say, a predator population or another population, and those populations drive what happens in evolution. So if there's selection, for example, for some trait, and it may be in the brain, it may be that they have a extra layer of cortex or something like that, that can drive brain evolution quite extensively. This is just population thinking that you would get in high school or in college. And this kind of, I put a couple of slides in here. One was talking about allele frequencies. This is generally the way we think about evolution in terms of population genetics. So you're looking at specific traits, you're looking at allele frequencies, you're linking that to traits. This is something you can do in the lab, but it isn't necessarily something that is, translatable. It's semi-translatable to theory and to practice in evolution. So there are a lot of complex traits that don't follow these patterns. It's not as neat as this, but basically the idea is that we have to have a genotype, we have to have a phenotype, then we have to have some selection, and we have
live streaming has stopped.
All right, and then we have inheritance. So we have different generations, and we have changes in these what they call allele frequencies over generations. So traits will fluctuate in their representativeness in different populations over different generations, or different they're heritable at different degrees across different generations. And so this is something that they didn't really talk about at all. it would be something I think a wonderful opportunity to better understand maybe some of the traits that exist in the brain, or maybe like different long-term changes. I guess maybe I'm more interested here in macroevolution than microevolution, because microevolution, there's no real, it's not necessarily very useful there. But like in macroevolution, between species, the emergence of new species and orders, I think is where you would have some opportunities. And I think with agents, that might be interesting too. In A-Life, we do a lot of stuff with evolving different things like phenotypes or solutions to problems. And we've done some work in the lab on like spatial cognition and the evolution of different cognitive behaviors and agents with very simple genotypes, and the ability to select different genotypes to produce different phenotypes to do different things. It's hard to really map that in animals, but in agents it's actually pretty easy. And then there are different structures to these populations. So, if you have, and I talked about neutral processes last week, but you can also have other types of processes like selection going on that can amplify different outcomes. So there's some spatial, structure to the populations. A population might live on the other side of a mountain range, for example, and get cut off from its original species, and that can result in the formation of two species because those species aren't connected reproductively anymore. So there are different ways that these can, a lot of different open questions that we can discuss. Then there's this urge to be teleological, and this is just basically this idea that sort of a default in science is the scala natura. So people used to think of like different organisms as being like on this scale. So like fish were the most simple organisms, then birds were maybe more complex than fish, and then it culminates in human brains. But of course we know that that's not true, that different brains evolve, and there's no real, we shouldn't make any value judgments about the complexity of brains. And in fact, bird brains are very complex, as are human brains. It's just that bird brains have evolved differently than human brains. So birds, like crows, are very intelligent, and they have a different brain than humans. They have the same origin, they have a brain stem and a midbrain, but then there are a lot of differences between the two types of brains, but they generate intelligence all the same. So this isn't like something that, this scala natura is just basically this idea that you go from like a very simple brain to some endpoint outcome, where human brains are the most complex. That's not the way to think about it. The way to think about it is this branching bush, this way of, the different brains evolve down different pathways that branch off for different reasons, and they can produce things that are very intelligent, or maybe they're not as intelligent, but there may be reasons for that. In amphibians, for example, or in fish, there may be different environmental factors that favor different types of brains, maybe some with high levels of representation, maybe some without. And that's just, based on where they've been living in their environments and these sorts of things. So it's a very different way of thinking about it than this teleological approach. So there are two papers here I'm showing you to show you sort of this distinction. The first one here is Integrating Neuroscience, Psychology, and Evolutionary Biology through a Teleological Conception of Function. So this paper argues that there is this need for teleology in terms of function. And, so there's this bias from neuroscience and psychology that we need teleology to think about things in time, and maybe in that progressive way. And in fact, behavior kind of requires you to think about that. But evolutionary biology, of course, is different because it actually tries to eschew teleology. And so these things need to be reunited in some way. The other thing here is, this is from a different part of the literature. This is from Evolution, Education, and Outreach. So it's a nice journal for people who want to learn the concepts in evolution that are really basic, but really going to get a good handle on them. This article is Teleological Reasoning, Not Acceptance of Evolution, Impacts Students' Ability to Learn Natural Selection. So their argument here is that teleological reasoning actually stands in the way of understanding natural selection properly. So this is an interesting point because you have this tension in the field between fields here, and it's just something I'm going to point out because I think that like they didn't talk about it at all in the meeting, and I think it's fundamental to some of these things, some of these debates. Finally, they didn't talk about dual inheritance models. They talked a little bit about cultural inheritance, which is distinct from genetic inheritance. You have a genome that gets inherited, but you also have culture that gets inherited. And we talked about these in different, I think maybe last week or the week before, where you have these two levels of inheritance, but you also have coevolution of them. So culture can co-evolve with genetics, or they can evolve separately, depending on what's going on in the species, in the local group, whatever. And so you see that like cultural inheritance is about inheriting ideas. It's about inheriting practices. Genetic inheritance is that background of the genome. And so these things can intersect in different ways, or they can diverge in important ways. And this is something that it didn't really talk about too much, but I thought I'd bring it up. So that's all I'm going to say about that. It was a very good workshop, and I know they want to follow up on it with other things, but that's I think there's a lot of food for thought there. So yeah, so let's see. Amanda had a comment. I watched Barrett's presentation, but none of the others yet. Her work on emotions is super cool. Oh, you had something to say, Morgan, or? Oh.
No, I was just going to talk a little bit about multi-agent reinforcement learning and how it relates to population genetics, but
okay. All right. Yeah, we can talk about that in the chat, actually. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of tie-ins there, I think, too. So, let's see. Jesse said, but definitely like to talk about Lisa Philliman Barrett more. Actually, I wondered about her for the reading group. Yeah, I think that would be good to visit some of her articles, or I think she has a book on some of this. So this is, I didn't go through the slides very much, but she did mention a lot about allostasis, and that might be an interesting topic to follow up on. Yeah, sure, Doc.
Definitely.
I'll do that. Yeah, if you thought science was a nonviolent arena, think again. Yeah, it's very, very contentious. No knife fights, but then again, they don't allow knives in the venue. Let's see. Yeah, Samantha said, I had to go, but thanks for today's meeting. It's great. Excited to see what the summer brings. And then Jesse said, would be interested in exploring the last two slides more in a frontier map sense. Yeah, I think those last two slides were interesting, especially the sort of the way that teleology is approached in evolution versus in psychology and neuroscience.
I think that'd be really cool to look at in a frontier map sense, meaning like how is that shaping the trajectory and development in the fields and so on. But yeah, I'm sorry, Bradley. I didn't actually realize that you had that much of a presentation.
Oh.
I thought it was different, so I might have mismanaged the time a bit earlier.
It's fine. But, I think we're okay.
That was great. I'm glad to hear about that.
Oh, Morgan, you had... Oh, okay.
I was saying that was great. Yeah.
Oh, okay, thanks. Yeah.
I shouldn't move my lips.
Oh, okay. Well, anyways, we can follow up on this more in the chat, and we'll probably follow up on it maybe next week. I'll kind of unpack it a little bit more because there's just so much there that is relevant. And so I did want to talk about one more thing before we go. I'm going to share my screen again, and I'll try to be brief with this. But we have, let's see. So there was one more paper that came out of that special issue, and Carl Friston wasn't there this time at this meeting, but I think this is from this special issue. Yeah, Systems Neuroscience through the Lens of Evolutionary Theory. So this is one of 16 papers. So they didn't even they only invited the most relevant people to sort of the core of the idea. But Pozzullo, Parr, and Friston, who also put out this book on active inference that we've talked about in the Cognition Futures Reading Group, they wrote this paper on the evolution of brain architectures for predictive coding and active inference. And so this is now kind of moving from predictive coding as a proximal thing in the sense of behavior, in the sense of cognition, what happens in 15 minutes or 300 milliseconds or whatever, to evolution of brain architectures. So the abstract says this article considers the evolution of brain architectures for predictive processing. And predictive processing, of course, as we know, is this idea of looking at feedback of sensory signals using some sort of integrator. So a lot of people use Bayesian models or other types of things to look at this. And you could use Bayesian models for evolution, but it's a little bit different because you're at a different time scale and you're dealing with different things that have to be integrated. So this is an interesting thing. You have sort of feedback at two levels. You have feedback at the behavioral level, and then you have this more indirect feedback to evolution. I hesitate to say that it's feedback because that's another misconception that people have, that they say, well, things feed back to the genome. Well, things don't feed back to the genome directly. What happens is that you behave as an organism. And then if biological selection predominates, which it often does not, then you get selected to reproduce for the next generation. Now, this is just basically if biological inheritance only is the imperative. Sometimes in humans we have culture. We always have culture, actually, and so culture can mediate that quite a bit. And in fact, it's maybe more relevant to talk about cultural evolution for people in terms of our own current selection. So this is something that it's a very fraught and hard to conceive of area, and you have to think about a lot of moving parts. But in any case, we argue that the brain mechanisms for predictive perception and action. So they're talking about perception and action, they're talking about predicting the next step in that. So when you're moving a cup across, from one part of the table to another, you're planning that, you're moving, you're looking at it, you're touching it, you're confirming, and then you're doing the movement. And the movement has to be, kind of stopped at a certain point, or has to be. So there are all these things that need to be kind of constant feedback, more a little bit longer term feedback. You have these predictive loops, or these autonomic and motor reflexes that were a legacy from our earlier evolutionary ancestors. So when you're moving a cup across a table, you're doing this. It's a very human activity. We have controlled motor movements. It's something we've evolved, and other primates have not evolved as much. So, the other great apes can't necessarily do the kind of fine motor movements we can. Monkeys certainly can't, although they can do, things that are closer to humans than, say, like a fish, or, well, I don't want to say fishes don't have fine motor movements, but not in the same way. So there's this evolutionary sort of trajectory that's, unique to hominids, and then also unique to great apes and monkeys, and then that's different from other clades like, fishes or bats or whatever. But this actually, some parts of this fine motor movement are very deeply rooted in our evolutionary history. So this is another thing to think about, that some things that we do, these autonomic and motor reflexes, you see across the tree of life in mammals, if not farther out. So, all mammals have these sort of autonomic reflexes where they have if you touch an animal, it'll respond by moving its head back, or it'll, move forward or do some reactive behavior that it generates. So these are things that they can draw from. And these sorts of things are key to solving the fundamental problems of adaptive regulation of behavior. So, there are these questions, open questions about predictive perception, and we can actually use these autonomic mechanisms to understand that. We characterize simpler to more complex brains formally in terms of generative models. And so we talked about in our journal club on Wednesday, we talked about, they used the term genetics, and this was a philosopher. And so Jesse had a question about that, and we had a definition. And as it turns out, the field of genetics actually has an origin in this idea of something being generative. That's like the sort of the etymology of the word. And so the generative aspect of it really comes from, some template or something that you're using to generate variation. And so it is with some of these, this sort of generative model of biological phenotypes, that you can use a generative model to produce different variations on it. And the implication is that it comes from the genome. The genome is producing variation on these phenotypes, and it's interacting with the environment. So there's a very interesting connection there. But these generative models that get put out by this, from the genotype to the phenotype, it gives you different variations on a theme, and they may include predictive loops of increasing hierarchical breadth and depth. So if you think about this in a genetic algorithm sense, you can generate a bunch of different motifs using a genetic algorithm, different network motifs. Some of those are going to look like the things that we have in our brain in terms of predictive loops, things that are hierarchical, things that are connected in different ways, and they have a certain breadth and depth. So the idea is that you're generating all these networks, and eventually you get to these sort of predictive loops that characterize predictive perception. And you may find these in other species, and they're just configured differently. These may start from a simple homeostatic motif and then be elaborated during evolution in four main ways. So one way is multimodal expansion of predictive control into an allostatic loop. The second is its duplication to form multiple sensory motor loops that expand an animal's behavioral repertoire. 3 is the gradual endowment of generative models with hierarchical depth. So this deals with different spatial scales. And then temporal depth to select plans in a future-oriented manner. So these are all things that you might see in different organisms and different lineages, depending on what the animal's encountering in its environment. If it needs to have a really deep knowledge of time, for example, it might evolve these temporal depth networks. If it needs to have very fine motor control, it might evolve these multimodal predictive control loops. You might have duplication of loops if you have different types of sensory motor behavior that you're attending to. Say, for example, using your hands to manipulate things versus using your feet to walk or to do different types of movement in the environment. So these are all things that can evolve according to their model here. In turn, these elaborations underwrite the solution of biological regulation problems faced by increasingly sophisticated animals. So sophisticated animals is just a term they're using for things that have, more complex nervous systems. Again, that's kind of that legacy language creeping in. But our proposal aligns neuroscientific theorizing about predictive processing with evolutionary and comparative data on brain architectures in different animal species. So they took their idea of predictive processing and applied it to the tree of life and different nervous systems. So this is, again, this idea that, you have prediction, you have observation of the world, you look for the discrepancy, and you try to minimize that discrepancy. And that's the idea of predictive processing. It's a very simple idea of a simple feedback loop. But then this shows a lot of variation across the tree of life and perhaps in evolution. And this is a basic design principle of the brain. So you see different types of feedback loops. You have this, for example, homeostat, which is regulating something in a specific state, versus an allostat, which tries to find different states for things and regulates it in those states. So this, they kind of embrace this idea of allostatic regulation, and they're looking at an interoceptive variable like body temperature to kind of test this out. And they show that you need these different network architectures to accomplish this type of regulation. So homeostats and allostats need different network architectures for this. Then you have these different, so you can increase the depth of this basic homeostat template. So you can add onto it in terms of hierarchy. You can add onto it in terms of temporal depth. So you can add time steps. So T and T+1, you have something that changes over time. That's different, but it needs like more depth sort of along that horizontal axis. Then you can have allostatic control from a homeostatic motif that's just adding on different features. You can duplicate this, so you can duplicate this temporally or for an allostat, or you can just retain this homeostatic control. And then so there are different ways that these can combine and recombine. And then this attempts to map this onto a hypothetical tree of life, where you have these different motifs that evolve. So this is what they call a cladogram, or a phylogeny, where basically this tree branches when you have a trait that differentiates it. So here, this is a stem, and there might be a couple of traits on here that define this split between A and I. And so then A and I have traits on them that split yet again. So it's a tree that branches based on shared derived traits or unique traits or whatever. And so those traits are usually put on the tree. And sometimes if you have the same trait in different parts of the tree, that's what they call homoplasy. So that means it's independently evolved. And so sometimes they try to optimize these trees to make sure that homoplasy is minimized and that everything is like a unique trait to a specific taxon. So these taxon are usually species, but they can also be like genus level classifications. But the point is that you can map this onto a tree and show how there's this, these shared traits and descent with modification. So that's a nice paper. I think that's a nice special issue. You should go through it if you have time. And so this is again a few more comments here. Oh, I don't know what this was, but I think I was joking with Jesse about his love of embodiment. But Brian says genetics in Husserl's terminology, yes. Coming from Brentano's distinction between genetic and empirical psychology, the way genetic in the sense is more connected to generative or general than a genome. Yeah, and so, that's something that, there's a history there of the word, and it's interesting. And then Jesse had a heart. So, all right, so I think that's it for today.
Yeah, thanks for going through all that stuff. That was great.
Yeah. Okay. So thanks for attending, and we'll keep in touch in the Slack, or if you have questions, let me know. All right. Thank you. Have a good week.